Hi, everybody. I'm Meredith Goldstein of the Boston Globe's Love Letters column, the advice column, and podcast. Welcome to another edition of Taking Care. This is a series of videos about how we can be good to ourselves and understand each other and be good to each other during these very strange times, of which we are in month, I can't remember, I think maybe 3. I intend to continue this series as long as it's helpful. I'm going to go to every other week so we can sort of have nuanced conversations about what all of this means. I'm also hoping that more people are able to take walks and to get outside. So we will be there for you and doing these videos for sure. And the conversations hopefully will be specific to the phase we're in as we move forward this summer. So my world feels mostly the same, but I have been able to get a little bit more sunlight in lovely Jamaica Plain, which is nice. And I'm trying to navigate things like seeing a friend on a yard from far away and how many friends is too many friends. And I got really jealous the other day because salons opened, but I did not feel ready to take part in that. So I think this is such an individual process to figure out what feels safe, what feels responsible, and what doesn't. And I hope you all are navigating that as best you can. Today we have such a wonderful and important guest who's going to have a conversation with us that really I probably should have started with. Boston College's David Bluestein wrote a book called The Importance of Work in an Age of Uncertainty. And the weird thing about this is that this book came out last year before this pandemic. And David is an expert about work, what it means to us, how it affects our identity, what it means to be an essential worker. Can you tell us, David Bluestein, what it is you've studied? And you're going to say it far better than I am. So hello, and thank you for joining us. And why don't you tell us sort of your area of expertise, which seems so relevant right now?
Well, thank you, Meredith, and thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be doing this interview, and been reading your work for years and always admired the work you do. So yeah, I've been a professor at Boston College since 1999. Before that, I was a associate professor at SUNY Albany. And I've been studying work, I would say, for over 35 years, studying work and career. I primarily started out in the career development world, and I shifted to focusing on work in a broader, more inclusive way, focusing particularly on those who don't have a lot of choice and volition in their lives. And over the years, I've been focusing on things like unemployment, precarious work, interface of mental health and work, and I've written a number of books in this area, Psychology of Working. The most recent one that you mentioned, it is kind of strange that I called it The Age of Uncertainty when everybody's using that term now. In some ways, it was kind of foreshadowing what's happened now. In this book, I identified a kind of erosion in the world of work that was also affecting people psychologically. And even though we had a low unemployment rate, I could have foreseen this happening through any kind of crisis, that the fissures in the workplace were very much apparent in this book. The book was based on 58 in-depth interviews with people across the country. And even though we interviewed a cross-section of people who were doing well, a lot of them were very traumatized by the Great Recession. And they started to realize that the world of work was changing. And it was affecting their inner sense of well-being, their sense of identity. So the book really kind of maps the terrain that this pandemic hit in terms of work and employment. And well, now we have, I just saw in the paper this morning, 40 million people who are unemployed in this country, which is heartbreaking.
It is, and I mean, you're right. It's not like things were normal before this or appropriate before this. And even among my middle class friends who felt as though they were secure, I don't think any of them felt they had work past a certain point, health insurance past a certain point. My younger friends grew up in a gig economy. No one knows sort of how to value what they do. And this is becoming even more complicated right now with so many industries suddenly being potentially dangerous, suddenly being off limits for someone who might have a pre-existing health condition. There's a lot to talk about today. I have about 1,000 questions, and I know readers do too. They wrote in, so I'm gonna ask a few of mine. I will ask many of the questions our readers send in, but everybody, there's a Q&A at the bottom, and so feel free to add your own. It's not too late to ask a question, and you can ask a question as you hear information, and I will try not to hog this hour with my own questions. But I wanna talk just about a very broad question about work and identity and where we are with it in 2020 and how that relates to different cross sections of people. You know, I think because of the field I'm in, there are a lot of writers, no matter where they are, how much money they make or do not make in many cases. I think there's an impression sometimes that journalists are, you know, have job security and a certain level of income that isn't there, but that it defines them. And therefore, when I see these headlines about massive job losses of an entire industry, right, where that psychology of loss of identity seems overwhelming to me. Can you talk about what might be going on in people's minds as they see their entire industry change in 2 months?
You've really captured a very important element of this. People, certainly in the last century or so, in Western countries and countries that where the employment market became much more diverse, where there was more opportunity, people, this is a relatively recent phenomenon, people began to internalize a sense of what their occupation was to their own identity. And actually, this even goes further back. If you look at the names, last names of people, British names, Baker, Farmer, Miller, people often took the names of occupations in their family history. So over the years, there's been some connection between the work that people have done and how they understand themselves, how they identify themselves. Certainly in the last century or so, it has become much more, it's been much more internalized in our culture that people would feel the sense of identity. It is not uniform across our socioeconomic spectrum. Many people in the US, in other countries, are taking what I call survival jobs. And often these survival jobs, many of these are the essential workers that we've all grown to really see and are less invisible. But these survival jobs, they often are not as internalized into people's identity. What are the people going through now is actually a big question, and I'm going to be doing some research on this during the summer. But my own observation is that there's a tremendous loss of identity. And I have a great friend and colleague in the field of vocational psychology, which is my discipline, Mark Savickas, who I heard say at a conference, actually it was in the shadows of the Great Recession, when he said, if work won't love you, you need to find something else or someone else who will. So I think what we're going to have to face is there's a few issues regarding identity. The identity is kind of like the psychological piece, but part of the theoretical framework that I've developed, Psychology of Working, we talk about survival as a core issue, which has kind of been left out of the traditional Western views of career, because most people had jobs that offer them means of survival. Mm-hmm. So I think the survival issues and the identity issues are going to be intertwined. And what I've been experiencing, just living in through this pandemic, is an enormous sense of grief and loss. And that's really painful. And I think this is certainly confounding our struggles over identity.
You know, you talk about this survivalist work, right? And you know, I read a heartbreaking story in the LA Times yesterday about someone who had joined Amazon and as a worker and wound up, you know, dying of this illness very quickly. And there's this new level of appreciation for essential workers defined differently, right? Like doctors, medical care professionals. This was a more obvious essential worker on the front lines. And there are posters and signs all over my neighborhood saying, thank you, essential workers who are delivering the food to their houses. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about how that attitude will be maintained after this is over. Will we continue, are we gonna have short memories about this, or will people who are not doing that work continue to remember who was important, why, and how those people should be compensated, should be considered, should have job security, should have protection. What do we learn after an event like this?
That's a great question, and it's something I'm deeply involved in. I've been writing and thinking about this concept of dignity at work, which is a term we think about and we've thought more about in relation to the essential workers, particularly those who are taking jobs like grocery store clerks and people who are doing deliveries, who have been what I call invisible in our society, have been really marginalized, even from our own experience. Things like housekeepers. You know, the question, are we paying our housekeepers during this crisis? These are big, complicated questions. Will we continue to see the essential workers? I guess I would say that I hope so. And I will work very hard to make sure that happens in my the public conversations I have and in my academic work. To me, it's an extremely important issue. My parents were essential workers. My father was a sheet metal mechanic for Pan American. My mother worked in a department store in Queens. And I remember they told me when I was like 10 years old, I must have said something a little bit snarky, rare for me, but it happened occasionally. And my mother said, David, don't always know that your father and we don't have glamorous jobs. What we do is important to keep the world going. She was a great teacher, my mom, and great wisdom. Maybe that was the comment that set me on my path in my own career.
Yeah.
But the essential workers are critical. I do think it would help if we had a president who could help the country to mourn, who could lead us in our mourning and our grieving, and who could also highlight these heroes. And I know that Andrew Cuomo has done a great job with it, and others, Governor Baker, but we don't see that in the White House. And I think that's a big gap in our nation's capacity to really recognize those people who've been so helpful and to recognize the grief that's all around us.
It's interesting you talk about upbringing. I think a lot about, my mom, who passed away in 2013, but she was a piano teacher. And I think a lot about what this would have been like for us as like a single parent family. We would have lost that income completely in the first months, right? Like, how would we have survived? Yeah. And in an era where there was not Zoom, I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to start asking reader questions, of which there are many. One reader asks, what to do if later career adjustments need to be made in your 50s? I think there are a lot of people who feel like they're in their prime of their career, or they're in a part of their career where they were already thinking about retirement, and now they're like, wait a minute, my industry has changed. I need to do an entirely different thing. What would you tell them?
Well, that's a great question. Part of me will say, this is an opportunity. You could rethink what you want to do. And that's the hopeful part of me. And that's the part that I would bring into a counseling session or a therapy session, working with clients who could present with this, which is, okay, this is an opportunity. The underside of that is to make sure they have a means of survival. And that's where things get a little tricky. But assuming they have some means of survival, whether it's unemployment benefits or some, partner who has income, or they have some resources, this is an opportunity to also rethink what they want to do. And for people who are facing survival challenges, this is also an opportunity to rethink what you want to do. There will be industries that may not come back. The travel industry is one. It will come back, but I don't think it will come back strongly until this whole COVID thing is over. So people in these industries, and I saw a question on the list from somebody in the travel industry, may need to rethink. So the main tools we have in our tool chest as career development specialists, vocational psychologists, career counselors would be to explore people's interests, values, transferable skills, see what they have, see what other kind of skills they have. And for people in their 50s, often people have developed a lot of skills that they're not aware of. There are tools available, they're actually free. In Massachusetts, there's a portal called the Massachusetts Career Information Systems that people can enter, and there are assessments there. Another resource is the local one-stop career centers, which some examples would be JVS in Boston, There's other one-stop career centers throughout the Commonwealth and indeed throughout the country. And these one-stop career centers are great resources for people and would provide a great opportunity for people to get some, excuse me, some career exploration, some assessments, and some ways of rethinking who they are and what they may want to do. And then we have to think about, what are the industries? What does the world need from me now?
I mean, that's a big question. And I know that as much as people are tightly holding on to jobs, right? And and hoping, if they've lost a job, if they're keeping a job, and everybody is, sort of wanting that security, there's also this existential conversation I'm hearing among people saying, well, one is about identity. Maybe this is not who I am, like 100% of who I am. But also maybe this is a time to rethink, like you just said, like, what do I want to do? What do I have to offer to the world? I talked to, on the podcast, a woman, in her 30s who said for the first time she is not ashamed to say she's unemployed while dating, because a lot of people are unemployed. So it takes the stigma away from this idea that she's not working right now. So many people aren't. Do you think that on the other side of this, and I understand this is like, you can't predict all of the future, but that people will be even more likely to consider hiring someone who is older than their typical hire, who has a different level of experience than their typical hire, because they will have such great empathy about the experience we just had. Like, I'd like to think that after this, people are going to be open to a lot of different candidates for jobs, people who might have felt locked out of that experience and opportunity before.
I hope so. Actually, that's a great point, because in the world of unemployment, there's a particularly unique aspect of it, which is people start to feel stigmatized about being unemployed. Hence, you mentioned your friend who was now comfortable letting people know she's unemployed. After the Great Recession, and after a lot of the unemployment began to die down, but it was still hovering around 7, 6, or 5%, during that period, the people who were unemployed went through a tremendous amount of stigmatization and self-blame. I hope that society will be more open. I mean, we have 40 million unemployed people. It's clearly not their fault. Rarely is unemployment the fault of the individual. It's almost always the fault of structural imbalances and lack of worker protections and economic forces. So I do think that hopefully things will be better. I really hope that older workers, 50s is not really old, but middle-aged and older workers will have easy access back into the job market. As a tip, this is something I've often recommended to clients who I've worked with, is to use this time to try to ramp up your skills. And if your industry is going to reopen, you think it's going to reopen and hire people back, maybe this is the time to learn some new software that's relevant to that field, or to take some online courses. So I think that's a good way to use this time right now.
Okay, a reader asks, I am beyond overloaded and I will be the only person left to handle the job of 6 people by summer. We are losing staff members and are absolutely forbidden now from hiring more people. So there is nothing my work can do to help me. I'm having a nervous breakdown and crying multiple times a day now. I have to problem solve for my job and I literally can't do it very well anymore. I fear my work will penalize me if they find out how badly I'm doing. As in the pandemic, they were not sympathetic, and I have no reason to believe that any exceptions will be made now. I am out of emotional resources, and this is something I hear a lot. Right? There's like people who are like, "Well, I lost my work," and other people who are like, "Oh, I'm doing the work of 50 people," and often I hear, because of love letters, that these are people in a couple. Right? Like, I've got one person in a household who is working 24 hours a day, and the other person winds up taking on the burden of home responsibilities because they have less work or out of work. Can you talk through what some people are experiencing when staff becomes limited at smaller companies where, I spoke to a company yesterday that makes a product that is actually very popular right now. And it sounds like a good product problem to have, but that's difficult too, right? There's now 4 times as much work, and there's safety issues with manufacturing, right? So what do you tell people who are overworked?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting aspect of this pandemic world of work. and I'm actually one of these people who's overworked. I have more work now than I could handle. My academic job, research, the public work I'm doing. Let me just first answer the question to this reader. I do want to just briefly address this reader. I did read that question right before the program. I actually would recommend that she consider seeing a therapist, because there was a lot of anguish and pain in that question. And actually, you can do therapy easily through teletherapy. So I did seem like she was working now. If she had health insurance, it shouldn't be so difficult to maybe ask, her primary care doctor or friends for referral. Back to the bigger question of this overworked aspect, and the incredible amount of intensity people are feeling. Part of the problem is there have been furloughs and layoffs, and the people who are left are saddled with a huge amount of work. I think that self-care is going to be critical. I've talked to a lot of people about this, taking a break during the middle of the day, taking a walk for an hour, hour and a half, taking little chunks of work that you could accomplish and feel some sense of closure on is important, and try to have boundaries. It's very difficult, especially people with kids at home and living in smaller homes or apartments. It's a huge challenge. Remote working isn't all that it's cracked up to be for many people. It's a huge stress.
Well, one colleague of mine who has small children recently said to me, I get half as much done in twice as much time. And that really just put a magnifying glass to me as a single person without children, what that experience is like. I mean, I don't know that maybe I'm wrong, but like perhaps there is a whole group of managers and upper management types watching this. I've actually been so impressed by the Globe, and I'm not just saying that because they are my employers, but I was really, right from the start of this, there was a transparency, and there was also in the communication a consideration for some of you are going to have to homeschool your children. Some of you need to take a walk outside today. Some of you are covering things that are very upsetting, and need to take care of yourself. And all of these messages were put out to us, that there was an acknowledgement, a validation of, some of you are fearing what's happening in the industry. If you had a message to managers and people who have employees right now about expectations and communication, what would it be?
I think transparency is critical. I think being clear in the information they're providing is critical. I think you have to follow the style of Andrew Cuomo, be honest with people, but also attend to their emotional needs as best you can, and make sure that what you're providing for people is a kind of safety net, as much as you can within an organization. The reality is organizations, profit and nonprofit, aren't able to really predict what's going to happen. And there is this increasing specter of unemployment. So I think for managers is transparency and empathy. Try to put yourself in the shoes of your direct reports and try to understand their experience and try to really internalize what that experience is, and offer people as much help as you can. And if you do have to lay people off, try to provide some referrals for them for career transitions, referring people to one-stop career centers. The JVS office in Boston is amazing. I would always recommend them. Outplacement work if they could afford that. But I think that the main message is be caring, be kind.
Okay. And I just want to make a point before I forget that in our last Taking Care episode, it was with Stephen Sandage, a family therapist who works at BU. And in that video and in the transcript of that video, he mentions specific agencies that are open for therapy now that are taking new patients through telehealth. So if anybody does need that, he was very helpful about how to find a therapist right now. I just didn't want to forget. This is from a question that came in today. My boyfriend's safe grocery store quickly changed to something much more hazardous. Although he has adjusted over the past few months, he is still anxious today. What can he do to adjust to the changes? And I imagine many people have this question, like, what am I walking into every day?
Absolutely, Meredith. This is a tremendous source of anxiety. A lot of us are being asked to go back to work. and we're being asked to go back to work when we don't know what the safety system is in place, what the precautions that have been established, and sometimes what we see is not comforting to us. I think this is going to really define this next phase of this pandemic, which is going to be, I think I've seen this in the CDC or the SAMHSA recommendations that people are moving into this phase of disillusionment. And one of our sources of disillusionment is going to be that maybe our organizations aren't always looking out for us. And sadly, that is going to be the case. And this is where the issue I've been working on for 20 years, which is to increase protections for workers, increase human rights for workers, increase access to dignity at work for people. It's really critical. And one way to operationalize that now is to make sure that there are safe working conditions. The problem is this free market economy doesn't always support those kinds of modifications.
Okay. We have somebody who wanted to know if you can repeat those specific resources for the specific agencies for career resources, just because that way everybody knows them. Do you mind just sort of repeating?
I'll actually tell you exactly how you can locate those near you. Go into Google, type in One Stop Career Center. You could also type in One Stop Career Center near me. It'll list the One Stop Career Centers that are located near you. Another way to do it is to go on the ONET website. ONET is the occupational net. It's something that's set up by the Department of Labor. It's an outstanding resource. A lot of people don't know about it. Once you get on that ONET site, say I'm looking, it'll say, there'll be a drop-down menu of, are you looking to find a one-stop career center? And then they'll ask you for your zip code. So that's the best way to find them.
And by the way, anybody watching this is going to get a thank you email. And in that email, we're going to put some stuff. So
we'll put in the link to the ONET, and we'll also put in the link for the Massachusetts Career Information Systems, which is an outstanding resource that's also been around for 25 years. Great online portal. And they'll also list the Massachusetts sites that exist, but they're all over the Commonwealth. They're all over our region. They're all over the country.
Okay. This is a question from someone who says, I work with people in crisis in the area of poverty law. And for me, I say thank you. How can I establish healthy boundaries while working from home in an effort to preserve my mental health? The lack of separation between work and home has impacted me significantly during this pandemic. And how do you, if you
understand.
At home, what do you do?
Yeah, I get it actually. And it's tough. I mean, I've always loved working from home. As a professor, I would go in usually 4 days and have 1 day working from home. I loved it. Now it's a different vantage point because you have so many things you have to do, the laundry and cleaning the house, vacuuming. And then if you have a very intense job, but as an attorney working in law and working in the poverty realm and work, it's hugely taxing emotionally. I think it's really important to establish these boundaries, to let your clients know that you're available at a specific spectrum of the hours of the day, whatever works for you, 10 to 6, 10 to 5, 9 to 4, take a break, treat it as if you're going to work. And the advice I've read from psychologists about remote working is to treat it as much as possible as you're going to work. Get dressed up as you were going to work. I don't think I've always followed that.
Did you see me? I mean, you're talking to somebody who's in a dress over pajama pants. I'm just going to totally disclose that right now. But that is, okay, fine. Dress like you're going to work.
I'll share the experience I had today of putting on a button-down shirt, which I don't hardly wear at all now. And I started to put it on. I thought, this is a weird garment.
It is a weird. You know what else is weird?
Why can't you just pull it over and wear a t-shirt?
I also feel like this is for another day, but jeans are weird. That's all I'm going to say. Jeans, I'm not sure we're ever comfortable now that I've worn pajama pants for weeks. No, but okay. So dressing for work. I think whatever works for you. I mean, I wouldn't become rigid about it, but whatever works for people. I mean, for me, putting on another button-down shirt is probably not going to happen till I do another one of these events, because I've gotten used to being really comfortable.
but setting up boundaries, and I think I understand what this person's raising is getting emails and texts at night. And this is in some ways the bane of our existence. And I have another suggestion after this, is to let people know you're not going to respond in the evening. Another suggestion I've thought of, which I'm actually going to implement in a few weeks, is to put up on your email that you're having a staycation week. We're going to be, those of us who are working from home and have very intensely demanding jobs aren't going to have a vacation. And I think we need a week to unwind, at least 2 weeks, 3 weeks, even if we don't go anywhere. I've thought of putting up an away message in July for a week and saying, I'm taking a staycation and I will respond to emails when I come back for 1 week. And that's another way of kind of creating boundaries, giving yourself time to recharge.
I just have a question about friends who were very much counting on gig economy work, whether that was Uber, I mean, anything that you could sort of sign up to do that, and suddenly these things are less reliable. Friends who might have thought this provided a certain amount of safety, and now they would like, when they re-enter the workforce, to find that sort of more traditional job that seems fictional. I go to work every day, I have health insurance, I have, how do you make that transition? Because I think that, in my early 40s, I'm sort of sit between Generation X and millennials in this way where the expectations of my older friend for the benefits that they get from work are completely different than my younger friends. And these are, I think about what my grandfather had, and I'm like, why can't, I would just love more security for the people in my life when they do return to work. And, and so do you have advice about fields and areas to look into for people who might be longing for security?
Great question. I think that, I think the gig economy is useful, but I don't think it's a replacement for decent, stable work. And I think it's, for some people, it's a good way to supplement income, but I think people really we all deserve stable, decent jobs that offer health benefits, adequate time to rest. So do I know the fields that will start to burgeon in this climate? Yes and no. I mean, I think we know that things in technology are always going to be needed. There's going to be a lot of work in the interface of AI with people, this whole kind of interface, the space between artificial intelligence and people. There's one field that's booming right now is contact tracers. Almost every state is hiring contact tracers, and it's remote work. It could be very difficult work, but that's something that they're hiring a lot of people now. And from what I understand, the minimum requirement is just a college degree. So that's an area where people could get some work. It does require a certain level of comfort with people who are going to be upset, calling them and saying that, the person you were with 2 days ago has COVID. It's a tough conversation. But I think fields in public health are clearly going to be needed. I think the world has learned a lesson that we need to prepare for public health emergencies. So I do think in healthcare also, the kind of standard fields that have always been strong, I think will remain strong. Fields that will involve people going out into the world, like hotels, travel, restaurants, I think those might come back they may not come back entirely like they were before the pandemic until we really have really solid either therapeutics and or a vaccine.
Well, let's get to that travel question, because we did have someone write in who says they've been furloughed from a job in travel in that industry. And they say, in terms of looking for a new job, it will likely need to be a full career change, as all of my friends in the field are in the same boat, either laid off or furloughed. How do you figure out where to start looking, and when? And even when you find a new opportunity, how do you get someone to notice you when you have no experience in a new industry? That is a question, and I want to add on to that how do you know when to decide that your industry is over, right? Like I also know people who are flying right now, and I know that I have friends who are making a vision board for where they want to go the minute this is safe, right? So that I could see a post-vaccine world where travel is booming again. So
Yeah,
how do you know how to totally give up on the thing you love if you happen to love it?
Okay, that's a great question. So what I
Or,
love the
yeah.
question. There's multiple questions. If I forget one, remind me.
Okay.
So,
Do the reader first. They're more important.
so the question about travel. Think about your skills, your values and interests as a kind of circle, and let's try to create a Venn diagram. Remember the Venn diagrams from high school where these circles overlap and there's shared space? Um, the idea, I think, for people in the travel industry and other kinds of industries is to think about your skill set in a more decontextualized way. I'm sorry, in a more contextualized way, so that you can understand what your skills are and see them in different fields. I would advise this person to look for the local one-stop career center and see if they can set up an appointment with a career coach there or attend a workshop on transferable skills. And here's my thinking on it. Develop some transferables, the transferable skills will also give you an idea of what fields to go into. There's actually some assessments on these one-stop career center portals that you could do a transferable skills assessment, then also do an interest assessment, and you could begin to get a picture of what fields am I interested in, what fields do I have some skills in, and then you could start to look at what these fields are and see ones that kind of resonate with you. And my thought about how do you get recognized, very important idea here, which is to find a way to do internships or volunteer work. That's the app. I mean, at this point, that's the, and or develop some skills in the area. Like if you want to enter an area like sales where there's a certain kind of software, I think this thing called Salesforce, try to take tutorials on it, become knowledgeable in it, try to get a certification in it. That would be one way to get recognized, is to develop your skill set, add some credentials to it. But the key factor is going to be to assess those transferable skills.
And to me, by the way, travel seems like most people in the travel industry, whether you're outward facing and have to be nice to people and to corral groups and to do schedules and there seem to be so many skills that are essential and unique that people in the travel industry seem to possess. Like if you can handle that world, like
they have great problem solving skills.
Oh my gosh.
My wife and I are watching this TV show, which we love, on Amazon, Bosch. Some of your readers may have seen it, or your viewers.
A lot of friends are a fan of Bosch, yeah.
So I'm watching this, and we're so amazed at the intelligence of detectives. And I said, that's really good problem solving skills. They have amazing problem solving skills. And you're right, people in various industries have great problem solving skills as well, the ability to analyze situations and develop solutions. And also a lot of people in the travel industry have great social skills, interpersonal skills. We could identify some of them right here. They also have often very good knowledge of the world. They could fashion themselves as marketing people, international marketing experts. There's a lot of opportunities. And then I do agree with you, Meredith. There's going to be a backlog of people wanting to travel after this COVID situation's over. And I'm one of them now. So
I'm one of them too.
Yeah, I'm really all excited about going anywhere. But yeah, there'll be and that industry may come back really strong. So then you could think about, what could I do in the intervening time to keep myself going resource-wise, and then develop some skills to come back in the travel industry, maybe at a higher level.
Okay. I want to ask a question that's more broad, because I think we're so isolated right now that we see numbers, and the numbers are scary. We see headlines, we see news, but often we're not seeing what's happening outside of our house. So can you paint a picture of, when you see a number that's however many million people, whatever percentage of people are employed, what that looks like in the real world, like who some of these people are? What I just feel like the numbers are so big. I have a hard time wrapping my head around the varied experiences, in the same way that we're all figuring out, oh, well, you do this, you sit on this person's lawn, well, I do that. Like, I would like to know, as you start this area of study, which I imagine is a lot for you, what unemployment looks like across a country during a pandemic like this. Who is affected? Who is forgotten? Because I think, we're focusing always on certain kinds of people, and other people get left out of the discussion. And sometimes they're the people who need the most help.
Yes, well, that's a great question. It's something I do want to address in this interview. I think that the unemployment does look different for people across the socioeconomic spectrum. I've done some research on this that has really underscored this point. People without resources that they can access are in dire straits. You know how you can see this? You watch CNN some evenings or any news program, and you see the people going to food banks, and you see they interview them online, you know, in these 10-mile lines, and some of them have gotten up at 12, or have gotten online at 1 in the morning to get food, and they interview them, and they're from all walks of life. Some are in the service industry, some are teachers who got furloughed, who didn't have a lot of savings. We live in a time where people can't really save a lot, and there's a huge gap in our labor market of the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots are the barely haves, don't have the resources, and it's tragic. So I think the unemployment picture is really diverse. 40 million people is a lot. And I think we'll start to see some stories about these. I know during the Great Recession, the New York Times ran amazing pieces on this, and I would suggest the Globe to do the same thing. Run some stories, interview people who are unemployed from different walks of life. I think people would soak it up. We want to know who they are, and a lot of them are people listening to us. And I don't want you to be invisible. You're not the invisible. You are our society. You are not forgotten. And we also need a leadership at all levels to underscore that point. You are us and we are you.
And I think a lot about people wanting to be helpful and not quite knowing where to go, right? Like a food bank is an obvious choice, but some things I think a lot about are for people having a career transition or looking for work, who can I help and how? Who do I know, right? Just because my brain likes to connect people together, right? So what are some of the other ways that we can all be helping each other? I think a lot of people need help. A lot of people can give it. A lot of people can give money. But like, where do you, if you're sort of sitting at home and this isn't affecting you financially in a big way, what can you do to be a contributor?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I would recommend is for us to reach out to people. I think this is happening a lot in the pandemic. I know I've been reaching out to friends I haven't seen in a while. They've been reaching out to me. It's been very, very moving for me. Let's reach out to people we don't hear from often, and that we particularly haven't heard from now. People who've lost their jobs often may feel some degree of shame and may not want to reach out. One of the best ways for people to get employment is through networking. To me, it's a plus. It's also kind of a negative about our society, because more privileged groups tend to have more resource networks. So it's not an ideal scenario, but it is the reality. So reach out to people who you haven't heard from and see how they're doing. And if they're unemployed, you know, ask them, what can I do to help you? Do you need some food? Should I bring some food over? You know, maybe you're concerned you might insult them by bringing this up, but just let them know I'm happy to do anything. Another great resource for people is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a fantastic social media platform. I know we complain about social media platforms all the time. You don't hear a lot of people complaining about LinkedIn because it actually functions as a way of networking. And it functions as a way of networking particularly well for people who may not have a lot of contacts, but they have second and third order connections. And through that, they can start to reach out to people, post something on LinkedIn about how they're looking for work. I think there's some resources that people should get to know. And those who are out of work, who are listening to this, I encourage you to get onto LinkedIn. And if you're on, try to ramp up your profile and ramp up what you have there, because it's going to be a great resource.
I found also that like this is a time where busy people are very open. I mean, you were so open when I messaged you about doing this, and I've had a lot of this is a good question too. Recent college graduates who had hoped to go into journalism, who had hoped to go into anything right now, and of course, it's like you hit a big pause button, asking me to help them figure out their next steps. and I'm happy to do it, right? Like anything I can do to help. And I'm also at home, so I have more, all my commute time and all that, I can make time for that. So it does seem like it's a good time to reach out and say, I need help, and here are the specific things I need. But getting back to that college person who messaged me, and I've had a lot of parents write to me about their kids, a lot of, younger people write to me. Starting in the workforce right now, you kind of can't in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So what have you been saying about younger people who are just beginning?
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a tough question. That's a tough one because it's really tragic what's happening to young people, high school, for students in schools, having to learn on Zoom, not being able to see their friends. For kids, their calling is play, where a lot of us, our calling is work and relationships, but kids love to play. They often may not have people to play with. So taking that forward, people who are leaving high school and now facing a lot of questions about college, can they afford it? Can their parents afford it? Then moving that forward to people leaving college and wanting to get into the labor market, it's a very big challenge. And here again, I would offer some of the standard tips of try to clarify what you want to do. Try to get some clarity on it and develop some goals, figure out and here it's kind of more important than it ever has been to think about what does the world need from me now? Because what the world needs from us now is not as broad as it was before the pandemic. So find out what some of these growth industries are. And actually there are articles on LinkedIn about that. What are the best careers to look for during the pandemic and afterwards? So there's a lot written about it on different media sites, on different social media sites. And here again, ramp up your skills. If you can't get a job, try to do some online courses, try to find ways to explore things, try to find even a remote internship in a field that you're interested in. Of course, that does privilege people whose families don't need the income from their college grad or high school grad. But if you can't get anything, getting something that gets your foot in the door is better than nothing.
I want to talk about a specific, some language issues I have and questions about it. So the first is the word hero, which I've heard a lot, and I have no issue with that word. The people who are working on the front lines of this have been incredibly heroic, and there was some backlash to that word about the implication that when you say hero, it implies choice. Mm-hmm. And I have chosen to be on the front lines, when in fact some of the people who are on the front lines signed up for careers that had not put them in danger. Right. And so just sort of applaud people and say, thank you, hero. It's respectful and it's said with great love, but it also maybe fails to acknowledge the necessity and someone saying, if I could financially, I would not be here. What language should we be concerned about when we think about essential workers, who's doing what and why, and how we thank them? Because I understand that criticism of the word and sort of what it might imply, especially about healthcare workers too, because I'm sure there are many people who work in hospitals right now thinking, if I could not be here, that would also be great. Like that would be safer. That would be better for my family. But income is necessary.
That's a great idea, a great thought. I do think that a lot of the people we call heroes are people who, if they had choice, would not be there. There's no question about it. And I don't exactly know what the language would be, but I think showing our gratitude in an authentic, genuine way is very important. Things like, like when I go to stores and people help me, or somebody comes and does a curbside, I could do a curbside pickup. I'm so grateful, and I make sure I let this person know I really deeply appreciate what you're doing. And I think, as a suggestion, another place to really get into your soul around this is this beautiful new song by Alicia Keys, which CNN premiered about 2 or 3 weeks ago, called Good Job, rather. And she actually wrote it before the pandemic, like the way I wrote my book before the pandemic, and it just seemed to fit. And there's some beautiful videos of montages of people who are doing a good job in our society now. Everything from doctors and nurses to custodians, people who are delivering food, people who are working in grocery stores, who are really, really on the front lines. Those grocery store workers really on the front lines, and as are the people in the hospitals, postal workers. I think I think another way to do this is to ask them how they want to construct meaning about what they've been through, is to get ideas from them.
And that's, teachers. That's, I mean, there are so many people on this list who, whether they're in danger or even just at home having to learn entirely new systems of work, gratitude is nice. And I suppose the language, and another piece of language I wanted to talk about, because I know we're running out of time, and please, if you have last questions, put them in that Q&A box. But I have long been a part of a psychology of, especially as a single person, of work being family, right? I think that's, and that's complicated, right? Because it is and it isn't, right? The people I work with, many of them are close to me like family. They're my friends. And, but for some people who've lost jobs, there is a sense of loss of family, not just identity, but of community in a specific way. The people I've worked with over the years, and not just at the Globe, but have seen me through life changes and helped me in it. And how do you talk to someone who may feel like they've lost actually a chosen family?
That's a beautiful, beautiful point. I think that's actually part of my thinking about what optimal interventions would be for folks who are unemployed, which is, and I've actually developed a prototype of a 4-session workshop series. One of the sessions would actually be on strengthening relationships. Relational support in life is critical. Connections, deep connections, they're part of the air that we breathe. We need them to survive. There's reams and reams of psychological theory and research supporting this. So for folks who are unemployed, what I've often done in therapy sessions or counseling sessions is to ask them to bring in a list of everyone they know. I know it sounds like a crazy idea, because when people, let's say they've gotten laid off and a lot of their social life was through their work friends, they may come out and say, I don't have anyone left. And I'd ask them to come up with this list, and I would go through each one of them and say, well, when was the last time you saw them? Do you like that person? And it's a kind of a more directive type of therapy than I often do in other kinds of contexts. But in this context, I think patients and clients need it. Help them identify a few people who they want to call or contact. And my suggestion is the easiest step for us when we're feeling isolated is to deepen existing relationships. Everybody talks about meeting new friends, going to meetups. It's a lot easier when you're an adult if you have some existing friendships or connections that you really value, but you haven't seen them in a while and they value you. That's a much more, it's a shorter distance to a close connection. And it's also important to develop new connections. In addition, for folks who are unemployed who've lost these relational connections, it's really important that they work quickly to reestablish connections with others, because not having these connections, not having work, those are some of the predictors of having some mental health consequences from long-term unemployment.
One reader asked how employee wellness programs can adapt to support staff needs. And I also wonder, I'm sorry I keep adding to these questions, when companies in all areas of work do furloughs and layoffs, is there a way that some of these wellness offerings can be made to them as well? So I wonder what companies can do for their current employees, and also what they can do for people who they have on furlough.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think they could, I think the wellness programs, and I know there's also programs on well-being at work. I've talked to a colleague who's doing that in a hospital in Delaware, who's running a really very vibrant unit on well-being. But the wellness programs, and I see them at Boston College, they're doing a great job of trying to support people who work at BC. I think we could focus more on the workspace and on helping people to kind of learn to manage uncertainty, help them to learn some skills to deal with anxiety. I mean, anxiety is both something that's very deeply psychological. It's also something that we can make some changes in through some cognitive behavioral approaches or other kinds of mindfulness-based approaches. So there are some things that we can do to help people who are struggling. And I do think the wellness programs could start doing some more preventive interventions. And I have a few in mind that I've been working on these prototypes for this new unemployment intervention. So one of them would be to try to enhance critical consciousness, which is a way of viewing the world where you're able to understand the systemic impact on people's lives. And companies may not want to do it because they may think that they're going to kind of be fostering revolutionaries in their midst. Not exactly accurate, but people who have a more critical consciousness also develop protective factors against mental health problems throughout their lives.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I want to thank you for coming today. We will send out an email that lists some of these resources you've recommended, and also has a link to your book, The Importance of Work in an Age of Uncertainty, that seems to have predicted some of this, and also, allows us to remember that where we were, it's hard to remember January, but we were in a different place in January, and yet not in some ways, in terms of disparity, in terms of stability, in terms of a lot of people's ability to know that 6 months down the road they would be okay. And I think it's an important conversation to have in the context of now, and also what we want to learn for 2 years from now, so that we can be healthier people in and out of work. My last question, I think, would be, just because of my day job and Love Letters, if for partners who are having very different work experiences, how can they support one another and share workspace or lack of workspace in the same house as we are more isolated?
It's a really important question. For people who are in different spaces in their lives, doing different things, one person may be on furlough, the other one working a lot. It's really important for the person who's working a lot to make sure that they attend to their partner during the day. And here again, this idea of like taking a 2-hour walk with your partner. And if you have a little bit more work to do it in the evening. Do an hour of concentrated work in the evening, so that you can provide support, because people are in different spaces. For the people who are working a lot, and they need some more support, they need to be open. So I think being open and honest with your partner about what you need, what would be helpful. Sharing workspaces is complicated. A lot of people in the Boston area live in very small, tight quarters. I know, like my daughter and her, my son-in-law, they live in a tiny apartment with 3 kids, not so tiny, but small. And my son-in-law works in his bedroom, and he said, I asked him where he works. He goes, I work wherever the kids aren't. So he moves his laptop around. It's very stressful.
Yeah.
Very stressful life. And I think compassion, kindness, and being caring are the ways to move forward.
Well, I hope that's for all of us. So thank you so much. Again, you can find Love Letters at boston.com/loveletters. You can also find the podcast there. The podcast is also called Love Letters. David Bluestein, thank you for coming, virtually to this event. And I think this was a huge help. And there are so many tools here. And thank you for highlighting what the world is going through right now, because seeing those numbers, even if you are one of those numbers, it is almost impossible to get your head around. And I think you've brought some clarity to the situation.
Well,
so
can I just end with one point about hope?
Yes.
I want to end with a positive
Thank you.
feeling about hope. Actually, because I got one of my colleagues, when I did a little presentation on my book at Boston College, he said, David, the cover of your book is so depressing. But now always like to end things with hope. People have talked about this. We have a chance to reinvent some of our institutions now. We have a chance to really see what the fault lines are. And I'm confident that, I'll just be honest, particularly with the change of administrations in November, that we will see an intention of rebuilding the institution of work and employment so that we restore some of the great advances that our country made in the 20th century of protecting workers. I believe that we can create enough jobs for people. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that we can do it. And it requires a little bit more control and structure over the economy. I am confident that we can create a better world where people will have dignified and decent work. I'm very confident we can do it.
All right. Well, thank you for ending us on that positive note. And everyone, I will see you in 2 weeks with the next Taking Care. And there'll be a transcript of this in the Globe, I think next week on Wednesday. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this. Great talking to you, Meredith.
Nice talking to you too.